My sister used protection to take the $9,000 my grandma sent me each month, so I turned her fake protection into a lawsuit she never saw coming. My name's Zena. I worked 3 jobs every day, every hour, thinking I was just unlucky, poor, invisible. But then one night at dinner, Grandma smiled at me and said, "Hope you're enjoying the $9,000 a month." 9,000. That's when I learned my sister had been living rich off money meant for me. The worst part, my mother knew. They all knew. They kept me working myself sick while they passed my name around like it was a gift bag. What kind of family does that? And if that was just the beginning, you might be wondering how far they went. So was I. I was already 2 minutes late when I pulled into the long gravel driveway of Grandma Eltha's estate, tires crunching under the weight of my fatigue. The house stood like it always had, majestic and unmoved, white columns framed against soft Georgia spring light, draped in creeping ivy and generations of expectation. My clothes smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution, a mix of my 2 side gigs that left just enough to scrape by. I'd worked 14 hours straight that day, barely enough time to switch shoes, much less shift identities from invisible labor to someone worthy of an invite. I adjusted my cardigan in the car mirror, smoothed down my frizzy hair, and gave myself the kind of pep talk only a girl with no power can give. Keep your head down. Smile when it hurts. Don't embarrass yourself. I stepped out, clutching the bottle of grocery store wine like it could buy me credibility. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary, lemon oil, and old money. The family buzzed like bees around the chandelier-lit dining room. There was polished silverware, Altha's vintage china, and everyone dressed as though someone was about to propose or confess. I walked in unnoticed. No one paused, not even my mother. They were all too busy listening to Isolde charm Aunt May about some art installation she'd curated. Isolde always knew how to fill a room. Her voice was bright, her laugh timed, her words tailored. She wore a beige silk dress, the kind that whispers instead of clings, and a pearl bracelet that looked suspiciously like the one Grandma once promised me for graduation. But that was a memory I'd long learned to archive. I eased into my chair. There was no place card with my name on it, just a napkin folded too neatly beside a butter knife. I sat down quietly, eyes scanning for anything familiar, anything that felt like it still belonged to me. The meal began like every other family dinner, chatter about real estate, politics whispered in code, and compliments passed like salt. I nodded when addressed, chuckled politely when expected. No one asked about my work. No one ever did. Halfway through dessert, pecan pie and mint tea, Grandma Eltha stood with a slow, dignified grace. She tapped her spoon gently against her crystal glass. The room quieted like obedient schoolchildren. "I just want to say," she began, eyes sweeping across the long table, "how proud I am of my granddaughters. Isolde, your gallery show in Charleston was stunning. Your gift for design is nothing short of remarkable." Isolde tilted her head, full humble smile in place. "And Zena," Grandma said, turning to me, voice syrupy sweet, "I'm so glad to know that the monthly transfers have made your life easier. $9,000 a month is a blessing I was happy to share. You deserve comfort." My fork paused midair. 9,000? What? I blinked, then blinked again. Surely I'd misheard. All eyes turned to me. Isolde tilted her wine glass with a smirk so faint only I could see it. I felt the blood drain from my face. My lips parted, but no sound came out. I forced a nod, swallowed hard, and muttered, "Thank you, Grandma." My voice barely held together. I excused myself moments later, murmuring something about needing fresh air. No one stopped me. Out on the wraparound porch, I sat on the edge of a wooden bench, pulling my phone from my purse with shaking hands. My fingers moved with mechanical precision, opening my bank app, scrolling transaction history, double-checking account numbers. Nothing. No deposits, no trace, no Alpha Monroe or family trust or monthly transfer. Just paychecks from the cafe, the library, the late-night cleaning gig, and rent withdrawals, utility bills, overdraft fees. A few years back, there had been some odd flags on my account, small withdrawals I didn't recall, but I'd chalked it up to forgetfulness, the haze of working multiple jobs, constantly juggling fatigue. Now my account showed a trail of deposits, just not into my hands. Transfers under my name, routed to an unfamiliar checking number. The beneficiary listed wasn't me, but the name on the profile still said Zena Quinn. I sat back, the phone heavy in my lap, breath stuck between fury and collapse. Behind me, laughter carried from the dining room. I imagined Isolde sipping wine, retelling some embellished story while our mother nodded like it was gospel. And me? I'd spent the last 5 years scrubbing floors, missing meals, reusing the same worn shoes until the soles gave out. I worked 3 jobs to survive. And somehow they'd made me look ungrateful for blessings I never even touched. They didn't just steal money, they stole the story. The story of a hardworking woman who never asked for much, who they now painted as spoiled but distant, too proud to thank those who gave her everything. I stared out at the lawn, neat hedges trimmed into shapes that reminded me of who I was expected to be, quiet, shaped, trimmed to fit. No more. I clutched the phone tighter. My pulse was steady now, cold, focused. She was living well on my name. My silence had bought her silk. That would be the last thing it ever paid for. Sleep didn't last. I lay in bed with my shoes still on, the ceiling fan humming a rhythm that sounded more like warning than comfort. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I peeled myself off the couch and made it to the bed, but my thoughts never slowed down long enough to rest. When sunlight finally crept through the thin blinds of my studio apartment, my body ached like I'd spent the night fighting a ghost. And in a way, I had. I reached for my phone and opened the banking app again, just to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe Grandma had meant a different kind of transfer. Maybe. No. There it was, my name attached to transaction after transaction, deposits that never reached me, routing to an account I didn't recognize but tagged as Zena Q. I stared at it until my vision blurred. My hands itched for answers, not theories, facts. By 8:30, I was dressed in jeans and a plain navy button-up, standing in front of my bathroom mirror. My reflection looked like someone who'd been surviving, not living. I didn't have makeup on, just conviction. I left my apartment, skipped breakfast, and drove downtown. It was a Friday morning in Savannah, the kind of day where azaleas bloomed like confetti along the sidewalks and the air smelled faintly of citrus and old brick. The contrast between the city's calm and my inner turmoil was unbearable. I parked in front of Heritage Bank. The building's glass doors reflected a version of myself I hardly recognized, tired, squared shoulders, jaw set with purpose. The receptionist greeted me politely, then asked me to wait. I tapped my fingers on the armrest of the leather chair, counting heartbeats until a woman in her 50s stepped forward. She wore a maroon blazer and moved like someone who'd seen too many people break down in her office. Her name tag read Marjorie Clark. "Miss Quinn," she said. I stood and followed her into a private office. It smelled faintly of printer toner and quiet decisions. "How can I help you today? I need to see my transaction history, including all third-party access permissions. I believe someone has been using my name, my accounts." Marjorie tilted her head, typing swiftly. "Let's pull everything, full permissions, account routing, linked devices." "You're the primary on file." "Yes. Yes, I should be." Within seconds, the screen showed my name, except it wasn't just mine anymore. Marjorie narrowed her eyes. "There's an email here that's not standard. It ends in gallery.co. Is that yours?" I shook my head. My stomach sank. "There's also a phone number that doesn't match what we have on record for you," she continued, frowning. "Mailing address is different too, Charleston." My lips parted, but nothing came out at first. "I've never lived in Charleston." "That's my sister city." Marjorie turned to me fully. "Do you recognize this signature?" She slid a printed PDF across the desk. It was a power of attorney form. It had my name typed at the bottom and a signature that mimicked mine but looked slightly too perfect. "That's not my handwriting," I said quietly. She tapped her pen against the desk, exhaled slowly. "This form was submitted back in 2021. It gave full control to the account with that alternate email and number. Whoever submitted it has had access ever since. Is that even legal?" "Only if it was signed knowingly." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I asked for copies of everything, printed and digital. Marjorie obliged without hesitation, offering a sympathetic nod I wasn't ready to receive. Outside the bank, I sat in my car with the engine running, papers in my lap, questions in my throat. I flipped through the statements, thousands spent at high-end boutiques, monthly donations to an arts foundation I'd never heard of, a lease on a luxury SUV, all under my name, even the mortgage on a downtown condo in Charleston. Isolde's condo. She hadn't just skimmed off my identity. She had planted her entire lifestyle on it. I thought about the time I'd asked her to co-sign for a small loan, just $1,200 to cover a security deposit when I moved into my current place. She'd laughed and said, "You need to be more responsible, Zena." That was 2 years ago. I started driving, but not home. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up a few blocks from River Street, where tourists swarmed cafes and souvenir shops. I parked behind a Whole Foods and wandered up the sidewalk like a ghost in my own skin. That's when I saw her, Isolde, stepping out of a salon with sunglasses perched on her head, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, laughing like she had nothing to hide. She wore heels I couldn't afford, a camel trench coat that looked like it belonged in a fashion ad, and parked at the curb next to her, my name, my burden, a black luxury SUV with custom plates. She never saw me, and I didn't approach her. Not yet. I watched her for exactly 10 seconds, and that was all I needed. Not to gather more proof, not to scream in public. I needed to remember. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a family squabble. It was theft dressed in pearls, a betrayal executed in paperwork. I turned away before she could spot me and headed back to my car. I had a folder full of evidence, a name soaked in someone else's perfume, and something I hadn't felt in years, a plan. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun was already tipping toward late afternoon. I hadn't eaten, but hunger wasn't what gnawed at me. I stood at the kitchen counter, hands flat on the cool laminate surface, replaying Isolde's laugh, her car, the look on her face like the world belonged to her and always had. I'd barely changed out of my jeans when I found myself grabbing my keys again. I didn't text, didn't call, I just drove. The route to my parents' house hadn't changed, same mossy oaks arching over the road like a memory trying to hold on. The Lynette home sat tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac of beige security and carefully trimmed lawns. It looked exactly like it always had, except now it felt like a stage where I was about to confront an entire act built without me. I parked across the street, walked up the path with a steadiness that surprised even me. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked once and stepped in. "Mom," I called. Inside, the smell of lemon cleaner and vanilla candles hit me immediately. My father sat on the sofa, a gardening magazine open in his lap. He looked up, startled but not surprised. "Zena," he said, already rising. "Want some coffee?" "No thanks," I said, my voice sharper than intended. He nodded awkwardly and shuffled toward the kitchen. Mom appeared in the doorway of the dining room, drying her hands on a linen towel. She didn't greet me, just stood there, eyes narrowed slightly like she already knew this wasn't a social visit. "I need to talk to you," I said, stepping inside, closing the door behind me. "About the money, the accounts, what Grandma said last night." I moved closer, pulled out the folded printouts from my purse, and laid them on the console table by the entryway. "These show transfers in my name, not to me, to Isolde's account. A power of attorney with my forged signature linked to her phone, her address." Mom didn't move. She glanced down at the papers, then at me. "I know," she said simply. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "You what?" She told me. Mom continued, voice calm like she was explaining a grocery list. "Isolde stepped in because you weren't capable of managing anything at the time. You were all over the place, job to job, sleeping odd hours, forgetting things. Because I was working 3 jobs, I snapped. To stay afloat." "Sure," she said, dismissing the words like they were excuses. "But that's the point, isn't it? You weren't stable. Isolde did what she had to do to protect the family's investment in you. It wasn't an investment. It was a gift meant for me." She gave a half shrug. "You weren't doing anything with it anyway." I felt something snap, quietly but completely. "So you just handed her my future without telling me, without even asking?" I did what made sense, she said. Your sister has always had a head for structure. You were just trying to survive. My hands were clenched now. And you decided that made me unworthy. My father re-entered with a steaming mug, only to pause in the doorway when he caught the tone. She helped you, Zena, Mom went on, still calm. You make messes. You always have. She keeps things orderly. She made sure your name wasn't tied to anything embarrassing. My laugh came out dry. You mean she made sure my name was tied to everything that benefited her? From the corner of the living room, I heard a cough. I hadn't realized Aunt Miriam was there, curled in the armchair with a glass of tea. She's always been dramatic, she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. I remember her crying during Easter because no one cut the cake her way. I turned toward her, stunned. You think this is about cake? I think, Mom interjected, you're turning a private decision into a public accusation. No, I said, voice rising. You made a private betrayal into a family tradition, and now I'm just the one dragging it into the light. No one said anything. Dad finally spoke, voice quiet. Let's all just calm down. It's done now. Not to me, I said. I looked at all of them, their calm, their comfort, their refusal to feel guilt. They had normalized my erasure, framed it as necessity, logic, love even. I used to think if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, you'd believe in me again, I said. But I don't need that anymore. I don't need you to believe in me. I need you to get out of the way. I left the papers on the table and walked to the door. No one followed. Back in the car, the silence felt different. It didn't press down. It cleared space. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't write in a journal or call a friend. I opened my laptop. I started with a spreadsheet, names, dates, amounts, accounts. Then I opened a blank document titled Evidence, Identity Fraud. After that came screenshots, printed statements, notarized requests. I built the bones of a case, not for the courts, not yet, but for me, to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that what happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. And it was sanctioned. They'd always wanted me quiet, invisible. They were about to see how loud I could be. I didn't sleep much that week. Between scanning documents, reviewing financial logs, and replaying every moment where my family turned a blind eye, my nights blurred into gray mornings. I worked my shifts, went through the motions, but everything felt dimmer, like my body was still moving through Savannah's spring heat, but my mind had drifted somewhere colder. On Thursday evening, just as I was finishing my third coffee refill at the library desk, my phone lit up. Grandma Alpha. A call from her always arrived like a drumbeat from an older world, elegant, deliberate, and rarely unexpected. I stared at the screen for 2 full rings before picking up. Hi, Grandma, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Zena, sweetheart, she replied gently. I was wondering if you had a free afternoon this weekend. I'm going through the family photo albums, and my hands aren't what they used to be. I blinked. That wasn't what I'd expected. I could use your help, she added. And your memory. You always remembered who wore what, who stood where. The invitation caught me off guard. After everything, I'll be there Saturday, I said without hesitation. That morning, I left my apartment early. The sun hadn't yet turned aggressive, and the air still held a trace of dew. On the drive to her estate, I rehearsed every version of how the day might go, polite small talk, questions buried in smiles, perhaps even a soft apology tucked inside a dusty photo sleeve. But part of me also knew this wasn't about pictures. It was about presence and what had been erased. When I pulled into the driveway, the white columns of her house stood firm, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I stepped inside, greeted by the familiar smell of lemon polish and lavender sachets. Her house always smelled like memory. Alpha sat in the parlor, an old oak box of photo albums beside her, spectacles perched low on her nose. She looked up and smiled, the kind that didn't quite reach the corners of her eyes. Thank you for coming, dear, she said. These old fingers don't like the photo corners anymore. I sat across from her, knees brushing the coffee table, and pulled the nearest album toward me. It was labeled Family Gatherings 2015-2021. We started slow, birthdays, backyard barbecues, holiday dinners. She asked questions. I answered. Who was that boy with the crooked tie? Oh, that was Kyle's oldest. And that dog, Tucker, of course. Then we got to 2019. She turned the page and pointed. Now this, she said, was the Easter brunch in Charleston. Isolde had just redecorated the porch. You remember? I looked down at the full-page photo. Everyone was there, Isolde, her parents, our cousins, even Aunt Jean, who never traveled. But something was missing. Me. I remember, I said quietly, because I took this picture. Alpha paused. But Isolde said you didn't show up that year. I did, I replied. I was there, behind the camera. That's the day she asked me to take family portraits so she could be in them all. She said, you're not photogenic anyway, Zena. Then she laughed like it was a compliment. Alpha's lips pressed together. Her hand stayed frozen on the corner of the page. We flipped a few more. Same pattern. I was missing from Thanksgiving, absent from New Year's, forgotten in 3 years of recorded memory. Would you mind if I got some water? I asked, standing before she could respond. Of course, dear. The kitchen hasn't moved. I walked down the hall, past the dining room, and into the place I used to sneak cookies from when I was 8. The faucet squeaked the way it always had. After filling a glass, I noticed her old flip phone sitting in its charging cradle on the side counter. That thing was practically a relic. It probably still had voicemails from 2009. Something tugged at me, intuition or habit, I couldn't say. I picked up the phone and navigated to saved messages. Most were from pharmacies or old church friends. And then I saw it, new message, April 8, 2021, from unknown. I pressed play. Zena, sweetheart, I left you the gift through Isolde. Did you receive it? Call me. I hope it helped. Love you. I stood there frozen, phone still to my ear. Grandma had called me. She had left something for me. And I never knew, because Isolde never told me, because Isolde probably erased that message from my side before it ever reached me. I walked back into the parlor with the phone still in my hand. Alpha looked up, startled. I found something, I said, placing the phone gently on the table. I pressed play again. The message filled the room like an old ghost returning home. She listened silently, her face unreadable. When the message ended, she reached forward, clicked the phone shut, and sat back. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I sent that necklace for your birthday, the emerald one. You always loved green. I never got it, I replied. She must have kept it. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her tea, but her voice remained composed. I trusted the wrong granddaughter, she murmured. It wasn't dramatic, no gasp, no tears. Just a quiet admission, like a crack appearing in marble, not visible from a distance, but once seen, never unseen. I didn't press further. That wasn't the moment for it. But something shifted in the room, the kind of shift that doesn't move chairs or pictures but moves perception. The frame had changed. The version of the family she believed in had changed. The photos we'd looked at were still laid across the table, but now even she could see what had been cut out. The silence after Grandma's words lingered longer than any thunderclap ever could. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a hand on the table, but the shift was unmistakable. The way her teacup paused midair, the way she didn't look at me when she said it, she wasn't doubting me anymore. She wasn't defending Isolde, not even internally. A quiet fracture had begun, and it was widening by the second. We sat together in her sunroom as late afternoon shadows stretched across the polished floors. I offered to help with some storage boxes she kept tucked away behind the antique sideboard, ones she hadn't touched in years, she said. She nodded, then added gently, be careful with the blue one that has some of the old jewelry receipts and letters from your grandfather's time. I nodded and carried them to the sitting area by the window, where light fell in a long ribbon across the carpet. The room smelled like dried lavender and worn leather, Grandma's favorites. As I flipped through a manila folder of older documents, something caught my eye, a pale green envelope, slightly crumpled, with my name written on it in Grandma's distinct handwriting. I glanced at her. She was still in the kitchen rinsing out her teacup. Inside the envelope was a receipt, custom emerald necklace, my birthstone, ordered and paid for in April 2021. The shipping address, Isolda's condo in Charleston. A weight settled in my chest. I held the paper tighter than I needed to, fingers pressing into the faded ink. A second page was stapled behind it, an email printout from isolda@gmail.com to alpha.monroelegacy.org. Subject, necklace gift, don't worry about Xena. I'll explain later. She's fragile. Better I hold on to it for now. My jaw locked. Fragile. That was the word she used to excuse theft. I didn't realize Grandma had walked back in until she spoke softly behind me. You found it, didn't you? I turned. Her face was pale, and for the first time she looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. She told me you weren't ready for it, she said. That you were going through something emotionally, that the gift might overwhelm you. I held up the paper. Does this look like protection to you? Or does it look like control? She didn't answer, but her silence was different now, not defensive, just broken. I was 29, I added, working 3 jobs. I wasn't having a breakdown. I was surviving. And no one asked me how. She slowly sat on the ottoman, pressing her hands into her knees. I thought I was doing what was best, she said, trusting the one who seemed steady. I exhaled quieter than the anger in me deserved. She made sure I stayed invisible. You gave her the power, and she used it to make me disappear. Grandma closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked straight at me. You're not invisible anymore. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I nodded, then folded the receipt and email neatly, placing them back into the envelope and tucking it into my purse. I stood, smoothed the front of my shirt, and said, I need to make a phone call. She didn't ask who. Maybe she already knew. Out on the back porch, I stared at the horizon for a moment, letting the wind off the garden cool my skin. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. Xena, her voice breezy, like she hadn't stolen a dime, like she wasn't playing house with my identity. To what do I owe the pleasure? You know what I found? I said calmly. A beat, then a laugh. Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're mad about the necklace. I'm not mad, I replied. I'm done. Xena, you're overreacting. I've always looked out for you. Always. You think you'd even be standing without me? You think Grandma would have sent you anything without my guidance? You mean without your filtering, your editing, your rewriting of who I am? She let out a soft chuckle. You're being dramatic again. No, I said slowly, deliberately. I'm being clear. If one more thing of mine goes missing, be it money, mail, memories, I won't be calling you next time. I'll be calling my lawyer. There was silence on the other end, then a scoff. You've always needed someone to manage you, Xena. I did it because no one else could, because you fall apart if someone doesn't clean up your messes. That's not protection, I said evenly. That's possession, and I'm not yours. I ended the call before she could say anything else. The wind shifted slightly, bringing in the scent of jasmine from the trellis. I stood there for a while longer, letting the quiet soak into me, steadying the rage that still simmered under the surface. I had given her one last chance. She chose to keep taking. 2 weeks slipped by, not quietly, but with a kind of slow, deliberate pressure that forced me to keep moving. I worked. I organized evidence. I ate when I remembered. Sleep came in fragments. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of my old fridge and the constant turning of thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. It was a Thursday morning when the envelope arrived. Not certified mail, no warning, just a standard white letter slipped under my apartment door as if it were a coupon or a grocery store flyer. It was a debt notice. I sat on the edge of my bed, peeled open the flap with trembling fingers, and unfolded the page. $30,000 loaned under my name, opened 8 months ago. A second sheet listed the email associated with the application, one I didn't recognize, but I knew the style. Isolda always had this polished way of presenting things, even fraud. The email was nearly identical to one she'd used for a gallery opening last year. I blinked at the letter, trying to process. Then I read the address tied to the loan, Charleston, her condo. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I changed into clean clothes, grabbed my car keys, and headed out the door without brushing my hair. There wasn't time for vanity. I pulled into the parking lot of Heritage Bank downtown again and called Marjorie from my car. I had her direct line saved now. "Marjorie Clark," she answered. "It's Zena Quinn," I said. "I need your help again." She didn't sigh this time. Instead she said, "Come in. I'll clear a space." Inside the office, she scanned my documents, hands gliding over her keyboard like she was brushing dust from truth. I handed her the debt notice. She read it, then looked up at me. "Same pattern?" "Yes." "Same address, same voice in the application forms. Same Zena Q styling." Marjorie leaned back. "You're not the first person I've seen walk in here holding paperwork like this and wondering how their own name got weaponized." That line hit harder than I expected. "I thought this was done," I said. I told her to stop. "I warned her." "She didn't take you seriously," Marjorie said. "People like that never do until someone else forces them to." That someone else, I realized, had to be me. I thanked her, gathered everything into a folder, and drove across town, not home, not to Grandma's. This time I went straight to the attorney's office I'd looked up 2 weeks earlier but hadn't called. His name was David Herrera. His reviews were solid. He'd worked financial abuse cases before, mostly with elderly clients who'd been tricked by their own kids. I thought, maybe I finally belonged somewhere in the mess of betrayed trust. The building sat on a quiet corner, all brick and ivy. The receptionist led me in after a 10-minute wait. David looked to be in his late 40s, with eyes that studied everything twice. "Miss Quinn," he said, shaking my hand. "What brings you in?" I sat down and placed the folder on his desk. "This," I said. "Identity fraud, financial abuse, and I know exactly who did it." He listened for 30 minutes without interrupting. When I showed him the power of attorney form with the forged signature, his brow lifted. When I played the voicemail from Grandma asking about the necklace, his lips tightened. When I handed over the debt notice, he leaned forward. "You've got a case," he said. "A strong one, especially if she used your name without informed consent for financial gain." "She used it like a costume," I said quietly. "She wore it until it served her, then threw it back at me, stained and shredded." He nodded. "We'll start with a formal filing, civil suit. If criminal charges follow, that's another layer. But this is actionable." I signed the paperwork that afternoon. My hands were steady, but my pulse raced. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a rough patch. It was theft, manipulation, and now legal action. When I stepped out of the office and into the late afternoon sun, the weight didn't leave me, but it settled. I had done the thing I was never supposed to do in my family. I chose myself over silence. I walked down the sidewalk, past a mother and her teenage daughter laughing about something on their phone, past a bookstore I couldn't afford to shop at when Isolda was spending thousands from my account, past a bakery where I'd once stood outside, stomach growling, trying to decide between gas money or a muffin. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I was focused. Isolda thought I wouldn't do it. She thought I'd bluff. She always believed she could outtalk, outshine, outlast me. But the thing about people like her, they mistake silence for surrender. They forget that some of us don't fight with volume. We fight with documentation, deadlines, and a steady hand. I had crossed the line now, not in rebellion, but in reclamation, and I didn't intend to stop until every inch she stole was returned or burned. The lawsuit had barely settled into its first breath of motion when the invitation arrived in my inbox. Subject line, "A toast to love, family celebration." Attached was a glossy digital flyer complete with pastel florals, cursive fonts, and my cousin Mallory's grinning engagement photo. Below it, in a less decorative font, "Formal attire requested, family expected." I stared at it for a full minute before deciding I would go, not to be polite, not to smile through another round of fake hugs and disapproving glances, but because I refused to let my own blood erase me while clinking glasses and pretending the room wasn't splintered in half. On Saturday evening, I parked across the street from the event hall. An old renovated theater downtown turned into an overpriced venue with whitewashed brick and twinkle lights hanging from the rafters. It was already dark out, but the warmth in the air still clung to my skin. Inside my car, I glanced at my reflection in the visor mirror. My hair was neatly pulled back. My dress plain but sharp, a slate gray wraparound that didn't ask for attention but didn't blend into the background either. Just like I intended. I stepped out and crossed the street, heels clicking against the pavement. The minute I entered, the buzz of laughter and string quartet music hit me all at once: champagne flutes, polished marble floors, distant relatives smiling through practiced expressions. I passed a few nods, some stiff, some hesitant, all guarded. I walked past Aunt Miriam, who gave me a once-over and muttered, "Didn't think she'd show up." "Neither did I," someone else replied. I kept walking. The venue had been arranged in clusters: high tables, candles, clusters of white roses, trays of appetizers carried by waiters who looked too young to understand that families could turn into battlefields. And then I saw her. Isolde walked in 15 minutes after I arrived, in a fitted black dress that shimmered with subtle sequins. Her hair was curled just enough to look effortless. On her neck hung the emerald necklace, the one Grandma had intended for me. Of course. She greeted everyone like a politician, embracing people who whispered behind her back and laughing with those who feared being on her bad side. It wasn't long before she reached the center of the room. I felt the shift happen before I saw it: the subtle silence, the pause in conversation, the way heads turned, bodies rotated, glasses gripped a little tighter. I felt it in my spine. Isolde raised her glass. "To Mallory and Daniel," she said, voice crystal clear, loud enough to echo against the chandelier. "May your love be honest, steady, and never tested by betrayal. Because, let's be honest, some families don't survive lawsuits." The room froze. Then nervous laughter bubbled up in scattered corners. A few relatives stared at their shoes. Mallory herself looked like she wanted to sink behind the cake display. I didn't move. I didn't flinch, but inside I was burning. I didn't speak. Not then. I just reached for a glass of water on the table behind me, sipped it slowly, and let the fire settle into resolve. A hand touched my arm. I turned. It was my mother. Her mouth was tight, her eyes sharp. "Outside," she said. We stepped onto the patio where the air was thicker than inside, heavy with the scent of blooming magnolia and the sting of confrontation. She didn't wait. "Stop this now." "Stop what?" I asked. "This lawsuit, this embarrassment. You think dragging your sister's name through court is going to get you what? A few dollars and a family that hates you?" "She dragged my name first," I said, "through banks, through debt, through silence. She looked out for you. She looked out for herself." My mother stepped closer, voice low. "You think I haven't watched you fail over and over? Jobs, relationships, stability. She gave you cover. She kept you from collapsing completely. She stole from me. Then let it go, for the family, or you won't have one left." I laughed, sharp and sudden. "Is that a threat?" She didn't blink. "It's a reality. Keep this up and you're not my daughter anymore." I stood there looking at the woman who raised me, who bandaged scraped knees, who packed my school lunches, who now looked at me like I was a stranger. No, worse, like I was the problem. And I realized then I had never been her daughter the way Isolde had. I had been the obligation, the quiet one, the one who didn't fit their mold. "Then I guess I never was," I said. I walked back inside, heels steady, heart pounding, but not from fear, from clarity. Back in the venue, people pretended to keep chatting. A few glanced my way, then looked away quickly. I found an empty chair near the back and sat down. Isolde caught my eye from across the room. She smirked. I didn't. They wanted me embarrassed. They wanted me to shrink. All they saw was a woman who didn't. By Friday morning, I hadn't told anyone what happened at the engagement party, not because I was protecting them, but because I was still digesting it. The sting of my mother's words hadn't dulled. Her threat, her betrayal, her refusal to see me as anything more than a complication, it stayed in my chest like a bruise you can't press but always feel. That's when Otis called. I was halfway through sorting case documents when the phone rang. His name lit up my screen like a memory I hadn't had time to process. "Otis," I answered, unsure if I sounded surprised or relieved. His voice was low, a touch slower than usual. "I should have called earlier, Miss Zena. It's all right." "What's going on?" He cleared his throat. "There's something I never said. I didn't think it was my place. But after all this noise in the family and after what I saw at the last gathering, I don't think silence is loyalty anymore. I waited. I saw them, he said. Your mother and Isolde, back in 2021. They were in the garden burning a stack of envelopes. One had your name on it. I only caught part of what they were saying, but I remember your mother saying, she doesn't need to see these. It'll just confuse her. I closed my eyes. I didn't understand what it meant then, he continued. But now I think they kept more from you than any of us knew. Would you be willing to tell Grandma? I asked. There was a pause. Yes, ma'am, he said. She deserves to hear it from someone who saw it. We arranged for Sunday dinner. Grandma had already invited everyone for a formal meal at her estate, a family reconciliation, she called it. But I knew it was more than that. She was drawing lines. She just hadn't finished writing names on either side yet. The evening came quickly. The estate glowed under the soft spring light, every window lit like a lighthouse warning ships they were getting too close to dangerous ground. I arrived early. Grandma greeted me at the door, offered no hug, just a quiet nod of acknowledgement. She looked tired but not weak. If anything, she looked sharper than I'd ever seen her. Inside, the dining table stretched long and regal, dressed in silver flatware and china passed down through generations. Candles flickered in sconces. The air smelled of roasted chicken, rosemary, and unspoken truths. The guests trickled in. Graham and Vera arrived together, my father silent as always, my mother carrying a bottle of wine as though presentation could fix everything. Aunts and cousins followed, dressed well and smiling like this was just another Sunday. Isolde entered last, wearing cream, soft makeup, perfect posture, the necklace still around her neck like a trophy. She laughed when she greeted Grandma, brushing cheeks like nothing had shifted. Dinner started slow, small talk, mumbled prayers, passing of plates. Then, just before the first bite, Grandma stood. Her voice was calm. Before we eat, I need a few words spoken, truths, not pleasantries. The room quieted. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Zena, she said, turning toward me, would you tell them what Otis told you? Every pair of eyes landed on me. I didn't flinch. I stood and spoke plainly. Otis saw my mother and sister destroying letters addressed to me, gifts meant for me, and one of them told the other it was better if I didn't know. That's not speculation. That's fact. And this isn't the first time something meant for me went missing. Some family members gasped. Others leaned back, folded their arms, whispering already. Otis stepped into the room. He'd waited just outside as planned. He walked to the center, removed his cap, and said, I saw what I saw. I've worked for this family 42 years. I've never said a word out of turn, but this needed to be said. Grandma turned toward Isolde. Is it true? Isolde looked stunned, but only for a moment. Otis is old. His memory isn't exactly. Don't, Grandma cut in. Isolde faltered. I was protecting her. Zena doesn't always take things well. You know that. Protecting her from birthday letters? Grandma asked. From a necklace? From kindness? It was complicated. No, Grandma said, boys steal now. You made it complicated for convenience. You have taken my trust and sold it for your own comfort. You manipulated, you lied, and you twisted this family's image to serve yourself. No one moved. You are no longer part of this family, Grandma finished. Get out. Isolde's mouth parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't speak. She turned to my mother, silent. Then to my father, still looking at his lap. She looked at me last. I held her gaze, and for the first time she blinked first. Then she walked out, heels clicking against marble like the ticking of a clock that had finally run out. Dinner was silent after that. Plates were passed with mechanical hands. Conversation stayed low, awkward, but I didn't feel awkward. I felt clear. They had all seen it now. Heard it. No longer hearsay. No longer just Zena being dramatic. No longer something to sweep under the family rug. I sat straighter. I didn't reach for a glass. I didn't smile. I just breathed. It had been nearly 2 months since the night Grandma stood at the head of that long table and rewrote the family story, not with drama, not with fury, but with a single sentence, a quiet truth dropped into the middle of decades of noise. Since then, the house had fallen silent, not Grandma's house. That space remained intact, steady, with her careful routines and unapologetic clarity. No, the house that went quiet was the one built out of illusion, the structure Isolde constructed with curated charm and cold ambition, supported by my mother's fearful silence and upheld by generations of whispered dismissals. That silence followed us everywhere, into the family thread that stopped updating, into the empty chairs at Sunday brunches, into the spaces where stories used to be told without scrutiny, and eventually it followed me into the courthouse. It was a Monday morning in June when I sat across from a county clerk, her face pleasant but tired as she stamped the final documents. The sound of each seal hitting paper echoed louder than I expected. Each thud was a small rupture, peeling back years of confusion, hurt, and gaslighting. These weren't just papers. These were declarations, official records, clean and unforgiving, confirming the restoration of what had been mine all along, my legal identity, my name, my credit, my financial autonomy, fully severed from the forged paperwork Isolde had filed years ago under the guise of help, protection, or whatever justification she'd invented at the time. All undone. All reclaimed. I watched the final seal imprint, crisp, unflinching, permanent. The clerk slid the file toward me. "That should do it, Miss Quinn. Miss Quinn." She had no idea how much that meant. "Thank you," I said, tucking the pages into the same folder I'd carried through every consultation, every late-night call, every frustrating Zoom meeting where I tried to untangle a narrative someone else had written using my name. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a soft gray, not gloomy, just overcast, like the world had taken a breath. The breeze moved gently, brushing past me as I stepped out into the street. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, fully, deeply, for the first time in what felt like years. This next chapter, it was mine. Not Grandma's, not Isolde's, not anyone else's. Mine. I had moved out of the studio apartment in the city shortly after the hearing. Too many ghosts in those walls, unpaid utility bills, unanswered texts, late nights spent eating crackers on the floor while someone else used my credit to buy champagne and silk robes. The kind of place where even the shadows knew I didn't feel safe. My new place sat on the edge of the county, tucked behind a row of weather-worn duplexes and wildflower patches that bloomed without asking permission, creaky floors, a narrow porch, a mailbox that stuck. But it was mine, every square inch chosen, signed, and paid for under my own name. No more shared accounts, no more forged signatures, no more favors disguised as family loyalty. I unpacked slowly over the course of a week, no rush, no timelines. On the last day, I opened a box marked personal, the one I'd put off the longest. Inside I found the picture frame, the one from that Easter brunch that used to be empty. I had finally printed a new copy, one where I was actually in the frame, off to the side, caught mid-laugh, hair blowing across my face, blurry but real. Not polished, not posed, just proof that I had existed in that moment. I slid it into place and set it on the bookshelf beside my battered copy of Jane Eyre and a jar filled with sea glass from a trip I took alone years ago. Some things could be replaced. Some things couldn't. There were letters from Grandma I'd never gotten, intercepted, no doubt, by Isolde. Birthdays passed without cards. Phone calls that never came. Whole conversations that lived only in the minds of people who hadn't bothered to include me. And then there was my mother, the version of her I used to believe in, the protector, the soft landing, the woman who would someday whisper, "I was wrong," in the stillness of morning. That version never existed. At least not for me. And yet life has a way of surprising you. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Alpha, quiet, composed, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. Her eyes were soft but steady. "I won't stay long," she said. I stepped aside, and she entered like she always had, graceful, like her shoes didn't dare scuff the floor. She handed me the box. Inside was the emerald necklace, the real one, still nestled in its original velvet pouch, untouched by time or lies. "I never got to give it to you properly," she said. "I'm sorry for trusting the wrong people." I looked at her. "I'm not the same girl you meant it for." She smiled gently. "But you're still the right woman to wear it." We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. When she left, I sat on the couch and held the necklace in my hand, letting it catch the light from the window. It sparkled faintly, nothing loud, just present. Later that week, I received a card in the mail, no return address, but I knew the handwriting, Briar. Inside was a single message: I see you now. I'm sorry I didn't. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I didn't know if I would call, but I kept the card. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, no filters, no dramatic music playing in the background. Just me, same eyes, same mouth, same woman who had once been overlooked by her own family. But this time taller, straighter, intact. Scarred, yes, but scarred didn't mean broken. Scarred meant survived. I had applied for a full-time librarian position at the local branch the week before. They called me in for a second interview. I had changed the locks on my new place, set up the utilities under my own name, bought a new planner. It was the little things that felt like victory, not revenge, never revenge. Reclamation. Peace. Dignity. Narrative. They had taken from me, twisted my name, misused my identity, reshaped my story until I barely recognized it. But they hadn't broken me because I held on to the one thing they never saw coming, my voice. And this time I was using it. Some storms don't come from the sky. They come from within our own homes. What this story reminds us is that silence isn't always love, and loyalty doesn't mean letting yourself be mistreated. Sometimes protecting what's right means standing alone, even against the people who raised you.